These are your Unit 3A, Day 1 notes. We are going to work on solving equations. Last unit, we were working with expressions. Now we're working with equations. So it's important that you know the difference. An equation is a mathematical statement that shows two expressions that are equal. So let's get that in. An equation contains an equal sign. Okay, so what does that mean? Before, we were working with expressions, and they didn't have an equal sign. Typically, we would simplify them, and there would be still more than one term. Well, now that we have an equal sign, we can solve. It is an equation if it has an equal sign. And what it's saying is that this side is equal to this side. So we would consider x minus 4 an expression and 10 an expression. And that now it is known as an equation because we have two expressions that are equal to one another. That means this side's value is the same as this side. Okay? To solve equations, we have to think about the inverse operations. Inverse operations are opposite. So the opposite of addition is subtraction, and the opposite of multiplication is division. It is very, very important that you memorize this information. You will need to remember the opposites or the inverse for this entire unit and forever when working with algebra. So inverse operations. Addition is opposite subtraction, and multiplication is opposite division. So how do we solve one-step equations? The first thing you do is you locate the variable in the equation. So here I locate the variable. Next, we're going to draw a line down the equal sign. Okay? Now next, we are going to complete the inverse operation on both sides of the equation. So on both sides. And when I say on both sides of the equation, I mean on both sides of the equal sign, and then we'll circle our answer. The reason that we're doing this is we're trying to get the variable alone. We want it all by itself, alone on one side of the equation, because when it's alone, we know what its value is. So here we go. Our first step, find the variable. Second step, draw our line. Third step, do the inverse operation. So we see we have a minus 4 here. And what is the opposite of subtraction? Addition. So that means we need to add 4 to both sides. Once we add 4 to both sides, this actually disappears because negative 4 plus positive 4 is 0. So it's gone. And we are simply left with our x on this side. And on this side, we have 10 plus 4, and 10 plus 4 is equal to 14. So when we look at this expression, we can determine the value of x because these two sides are equal. X is equal to 14. The reason you have to do the same thing on both sides, because if you don't, they're no longer equal. Okay? So if this side is equal to this side, the only way it will remain equal is if when you do something over here, you do something over there. Now looking at this, you might have been like, oh, Miss Pricing, I can do this in my head. X minus 4 is 10. Well, duh, 14 minus 4 is 10. Perfect. These first ones are going to seem pretty easy, and that's so that you can get the hang of what you're supposed to do when it gets a little bit harder. So let's look at this next one. We have 20 plus x equals 36. My first thing is I'm going to find the variable. I found my variable. Next, I'm going to draw a line down the center. Now I'm going to do the opposite. You're like, opposite of what? There's nothing opposite here. I just have this positive x. I'm trying to do the inverse operation of the number. What? Okay, remember, the opposite of addition is subtraction. Or The opposite of a positive number is a negative number. So because we have this positive 20 here, to get x alone, we got to get rid of this. How do we get rid of it? Well, we subtract it. So I'm going to subtract 20 from both sides. Now 20 minus 20 is 0. So now we've set this equal to 0, so that means x is alone on this side of the equation, which is what our goal is because we want to figure out what the value of x is. Now if we look over here, we have 36 minus 20, and 36 minus 20 is equal to 16. So we know that x is equal to 16. All right, let's keep going. Make sure that you're actually listening to this. All right, and copying in your notes. So step 1, find my variable. Step 2, line down the center. Step 3, do the inverse operation. Well, we have 2x, which means 2 times x. What is the opposite of multiplication? Division. So I need to divide both sides by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So we are left with 1x on this side. That is why we do the opposite, so that we have x alone. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, so we're simply left with 1x. 18 divided by 2 is 9, so x is equal to 9. Okay, let's look at this next one. We have x divided by 4 is equal to 2. Remember, in algebra, division is always going to be written as a fraction. So when we see this fraction, we read it from top to bottom. X is divided by 4. My first step is to locate my variable. My second step is to draw a line down the center. My next step is to do the inverse operation. Well, the opposite of division is multiplication. So I need to multiply this side by 4 and multiply this side by 4. When we do this, we now are left with 4 times 1/4, 4 divided by 4, which is equal to 1. So now we just have x on this side. And over here, we have 2 times 4, which is 8. So x is equal to 8. Okay, make sure you have all of this in your notes. All right, let's do a few more together. We have some positive and negatives here, so that sometimes gets a little tricky, so make sure you're paying attention. All right, here we go. First step, find my variable. Second step, line down the center. Third step, inverse operation. Well, I have a -3. I'm trying to get x alone, so the opposite of -3 is +3. So I add 3 to both sides. Now, -3 plus +3 is 0. And I'm simply left with x on this side. 14 plus 3 is equal to 17. So x is equal to 17. And I'm going to rewrite that. Beautiful. Okay. Now what I want you to do is pause the video and try this one on your own. You can see that it's a -8. Remember what the opposite is, because that's what you do on both sides. Okay. Hopefully you tried this one on your own and you got the same answer as me. We highlighted our variable, x. We drew a line down the center. We did the opposite or the inverse operation, so we added 8 to both sides. Now we're simply left with x on this side and -32 plus 8 is equal to 24. And hopefully you used your calculator like I always tell you, so that you would know that -32 plus 8 is equal to +24. All right, now we have these two. We have 30 equals 5x, so this is multiplication. And we have 3 equals x divided by 9, division. I'd like you to pause your video and try to solve these two on your own. Okay, hopefully you did that and you get the same answer as me. So we are going to find our variable, line down the center, do the opposite. The opposite of multiplication is division. So I gotta divide by 5, divide by 5. 30 divided by 5 is equal to 6. And 5 divided by 5 is equal to 1. So I just have my x over here. All right, next one. 3 is equal to x divided by 9. Let's find that variable so we know what we're trying to get alone. Next, line down that center. Next, we do the inverse operation. So we have to multiply both sides by 9. Now that we've multiplied both sides by 9, I just have my x over here. And 9 times 3 is equal to 27. So we know x is equal to 27. All right, last two, you guys. Hang in there with me. And remember, if I'm going too fast, you can slow down the speed on YouTube. Okay, so here we can see we have 32 equals negative x. First, we are going to find our variable, negative x. Next, we draw our line down the center. And now you look here and you'll be like, what the heck? There is no inverse operation. What are you trying to do to me? Well, when we have this negative x, we can view this as negative 1 times x, all right? Or negative 1x, because remember, when we see a plain x like that, that means 1x. So a negative sign here means negative 1x. So we're going to write it like that. Then we'll write the rest of the equation. We have 32 equals negative 1 times x. Well, now we do the inverse operation. The opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1. 32 divided by negative 1 is negative 32. And negative 1 divided by negative 1 is positive 1. So we're left with just simply x. Negative 32 is equal to x. All right, last one. Here we have negative 3/4 x is equal to 8. Okay, this looks a little bit different. We have a fraction or division sign here that does not have 1. We are still going to multiply by the opposite, and the opposite of negative 3/4 is positive 3/4. So let's follow all of our steps first. Find our variable. We're trying to get that on one side of the equation by itself. Draw a line down the center. Now I multiply both sides by the reciprocal or by the opposite fraction or inverse. So here we have negative 4/3 and negative 4/3. We're multiplying by negative 4/3 on both sides so we can get our variable by itself. So now we're simply left with x on this side. Okay, and if we put this in our calculator, we have 8 times negative 4/3. We get the answer of negative 32/3. You'll probably get a decimal answer. Typically, your answers will not be decimals, okay? This just didn't line up perfectly, so it's better if it's a decimal when you're working with algebra to leave it as a fraction. And remember, you have your fraction plus calculator you can always refer to. So make sure you have all the correct information in your notes before you move on to the next page. Okay, here is our next page. Now this is the page you do completely on your own. This is how I'm going to assess whether you watched the video or not and that you understood the concept. So please follow the steps that were shown to you on the other pages. If you forgot, just go back to the beginning of the video, rewatch, and then try. So go ahead, do this on your own, and then turn in via Canvas.